Ever since I've done the George's golf game, people have been telling me, it's too bad that I hadn't done an album or put it on cassette. So having a lot of luck with old George's golf game, I've decided to share a few stories that I've picked up along the way. One thing I found out along the way is that a laugh is the best universal medicine around. A man that can't laugh, he might as well be dead. So a few little stories along the way. One day we were at a mall, and this Italian lady had bought a new hat. She came out of the mall, and it was raining, so she picked up the tail of her dress and covered her hat. Luigi is coming around the corner. Mrs. Pasquale, I see your bum. She said, Luigi, she said, this a bum is 70 years old, but this a hat a brand new. And we got some funny people down home. The other day, the contractor hired 12 Newfoundlanders and 12 Frenchmen to put in telephone poles. End of the day, he called them in the office and he said, boys, how many poles did you put in today? Well, the Frenchman had 12 poles in. Newfoundlander said, well, we got 3 poles in, sir. Well, he says, how come these guys got 12 poles in, you fellows got 3 in? He said, yes, sir, but you should go out and see how far theirs is sticking out of the ground. How do you tell a Jewish fellow from an Italian? Well, the Jewish fellow is the guy in the Italian suit. And then you've got the ladies. You got the French girl, you got the Newfie girl, and you got the Jewish girl. Or some things are said after they make love. The Newfie girl says, "Boy, that sounds shocking good. Some shocking good." The French girl says, "Ma chérie." She said, "When we gonna do that again, huh?" The Jewish girl says, "Harry, the ceiling needs painting." Back years ago, when they gave out the lashes, the captains on the ships, of course, had to administer the punishment when the sailors did something wrong. And on this particular night, it was a Swede, a Russian, and a Newfoundlander got in trouble. The captain had to give them 30 lashes. He said to the Swede, "Now, before I give you the lashes," he said, "what do you want on your back?" The Swede says, "Sir, you better put a lot of grease on my back." "And you, Russian," he says, "what do you want on your back?" And he says, "Oh, me strong," he said, "you give me the lashes." Now he said, "Noof boy," he says, "what do you want on your back?" And he says, "Oh, sir, you can put that Russian on my back." And you got Uncle George down there. He always has a few problems. He never played golf too well. Anyway, he was down in the States playing golf one day, and he was slicing off the daisies and chopping off the buttercups. Every chop he took at the ball, up goes the buttercups. Gets out to the 9th hole, met a leprechaun. The leprechaun said, "Listen, boy," he says, "what are you doing here chopping off all my buttercups?" He said, "From now on," he says, "you're going to get a craving for butter, you're going to eat butter, and you're going to get sick." And George is laughing his head off. And the leprechaun said, "Well, you know what I've just done to you," he says, "taken away all these privileges, but you are going to be a sick man, and you're not going to be able to stop eating butter." Well, Uncle George said, "Boy, 3 feet farther, and I would have been in the Pussy Willows." And one day he had a date. Pushing 70 now, and he had a date with a 20-year-old girl. Called up the doctor. He said, "Doc," he says, "I want some medicine to give me some energy, some pep." The doctor said, "Well, boy," he says, "I'll give you something to try to give you a little mileage." Called him up about 10 o'clock, and he says, "Old boy," he said, "how is that medicine working?" He said, "Fantastic, doctor." He said, 7 times already. The doctor said, 7 times? He said, "What about the girl?" "Oh," he said, "she's not here yet." Then there's Mrs. Smith and Mrs. O'Reilly. They chat over the backyard fence. Mrs. O'Reilly says, "You know, Mrs. Smith," she says, "I've been getting a bad headache lately." And Mrs. Smith says, "My dear, when I gets a bad headache, my husband comes home, makes bad, passionate love to me, and the headache goes away." She said, "You should try that." She said, "Yes, I will, my dear. What time does your husband get home?" The old man went away to Fort McMurray. I think it was Fort McMurray or Tumbler Ridge. Anyway, he was making some money, and he wrote a letter home the other day. He said, "My dear, I had a good year last year." She said, "Before I come home, though," he said, "I bought a condo." And she told Mrs. O'Reilly, and Mrs. O'Reilly said, "My dear, if I was you, I'd still keep taking the pill." And she complains about Uncle Jack drinking. I guess everybody complains about Uncle Jack. Most of us go over to his place after Christmas to help him drink up his presents. They tell me one day they were having a ship launching down there, and it took them 3 days to launch the ship because they couldn't get the bottle away from Uncle Jack. And one night he got out and he got in a fight. He came home and his nose was broken and his eyes black. His wife says, Jack says, what the hell happened to you tonight? Well, he said, I got in a fight with Schultz. And he said, Schultz, that little sawed-off runt, that little 4-foot, that midget. He said, shh, woman, he said, hush now, he said, don't talk too harshly about the dead. He's trying, we got a guy in Twillingate trying to marry a girl, and he keeps asking her. She keeps saying no. He keeps up, he's real persistent. He said, will you marry me? She said, no. And he said, why not? She said, I can't marry you. He said, why? Well, look, she says, I can't marry you because I'm lesbian. He said, that's okay, my dear. You go to your church and I'll go to mine. Then there's this year that we had the great whole moose hunt. We have a moose hunt every year. There's a lot of moose in Newfoundland, and everybody got to get their moose by. This particular year, I was cutting pulpwood up in Badger. Actually, I was in on Old Sandy somewhere with Pat Carroll from Badger at the time. Cutting a bit of pulpwood, sir, and the same year, a Newfoundlander went out with an American hunting. And the American said to the Newfoundlander, he says, now, he said, Newf, we're going hunting, but you better be quiet. The Newfoundlander says, look, boy, he says, I've been out in this bush half my life. I know all about being quiet when it comes to hunting. And half an hour later, there was a big screech, and the American rushed through the bush. He said, buddy, he said, I thought I told you to be quiet. The Newfoundlander said, look, boy, he says, when that weasel got me by the throat and was choking me to death, I didn't screech. When that big bear come out through the trees and had a bear hug on me and was crushing me to death, I didn't screech. But he said, when those two squirrels went up me legs and I heard them say, shall we eat them here or take them with us? Then I screeched. Well, the other day, Uncle John got elected to council. Of course, he never went to school very much, but out at the council meeting, they got in arguments about what they needed, this and that, and then some guy said, what we need in here is a chandelier. And he hit the table and jumped up, and he said, chandelier be damned. He said, what we need here is more light. And the old lady went to the doctor the other day. She said, we got wonderful doctors here. She said, wonderful doctors. If you're sick, they'll pull you through death's door. And the doctor said to the old boy, he says, you're going to die, he says. He said, anything else you'd like? He said, certainly there is. I'd like to see another doctor. You can't beat the Irish for some of the sayings. Did you ever hear the old Irishman say, the sooner I never see your face again, the better it will be for both of us when we do? Now, in the shortest conversation in the world are two Newfoundlanders. They're coming in from fishing. One fellow looks up at the other fellow and he says, Arn. The other guy says, Narn. The only shorter conversation than that is when you meet a Newfoundlander on the road and he gives you a little nod of the head. That's it. And there's this fellow that had an awful problem with his passion for beans. He'd worked in the woods a lot, of course, and you can get a lot of mileage out of beans. It was beans, bologna, and beans. And I know all about that because I had a lot of beans in that camp that I was in one time. Anyway, the old boy ate beans, and finally he met a girl, and he was going to get married, and she was quite a lady. And he thought, well, she'll never put up with my carrying on, so he made the supreme sacrifice. Wasn't going to eat any baked beans. So he's off the beans. But one day he broke down out in the country. His car broke down, and he had to walk 3 or 4 miles home. And when he's walking home, he passed his eatery. Smelled the beautiful aroma of baked beans. Well, sir, he just couldn't resist. He went in. Before he left the place to walk home, he had ordered 3 big orders of baked beans. So here he goes, putting along, and he figured he had miles to walk. He'd be safe by the time he got home. Well, when he got to the front door, his wife greeted him, and she was exceptionally excited this day. Apparently it was his birthday, but he didn't know it. She said, darling, she said, I've got a wonderful surprise for supper. First, you got to put on this blindfold. Now, you put this blindfold on and promise not to take it off. So she led him to the edge of the table and sat him down. Just then the phone rang. Well, she went down the hall and answered the phone, and here was his opportunity. He felt this explosion coming on. Puts his weight over on one cheek, Boom she goes, a real explosion. And it was also pretty ripe. Fumbles for a napkin, blows away the smell. The phone conversation is going on, he feels another one coming on. Oh, this was a real explosion. 4th of July. He lifts up on the other cheek and let her go. Boom. Ah, the pipes are working today. The pipes are working today. And he fans the air again. This goes on for about 10 minutes, and his wife comes back to the table. Here he was. He was listening all the time to see when the phone conversation would end. And she comes back. He looks pretty innocent, and he's there blindfolded. She said, "Now, darling, you can take off the blindfold." He took it off, and there around the table was 12 guests.